everybody, my name is Jillian and welcome to Frizz Biscuit and Happy New Year! Hope you're having a great 2016 so far. Mine's been alright, apart from the fact that I've been melting with 40-degree temperatures every other day. It's fine, I live in Australia. I'm used to just being comprised mostly of sweat. My first video of the year, I thought that I would do something that is not even slightly related to 2016 and talk about the favourite books that I read in 2015. There's a little bit of YA, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of graphic novel type stuff, and all of them are just great and I loved reading them so much, so I thought I would share them with you in case any of you guys wanted to read them as well. First we're going to have the YA sort of section, and the first book we're going to talk about is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Science. I think that's how you say it, I'm not entirely sure, sorry. This book I've been hearing about for a while, and all I knew about this book was that it was called Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, and this is what the cover looks like. It was just a really beautiful story, and it was sad, and it was happy, and the plot wasn't as, not linear as it normally is, but it wasn't as exposition, climax, and then resolution as I'm used to reading in sort of YA books. Sort of had like a whole bunch of different like spikes in the plot. It made me smile a lot, and there were bits that were just really eloquent and beautiful and you were really in the moment. This book is basically about the relationship between Aristotle and Dante, who are two boys that meet one summer, and it follows the course of about 2 years, I think. It shows as their friendship continues to develop and grow, and it's just a really beautiful story, and I definitely recommend this for you. There are a couple of trigger warnings for this book. I'll put them down in the description if you want to check those out so I don't give anyone spoilers who doesn't want them, but I definitely recommend this book. It was great. The next book on my list is Simon versus the Homosapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. This book was just great. I loved it so much. It's a really feel-good kind of book where it feels like the author actually understands what teenagers sound like and how they talk and how they interact with each other. I've heard some criticism saying that it was kind of over the top in the way they portray the way that teenagers talk, but I thought it was spot on. Even though I'm older than a teenager, I still talk like this, so I don't know what it says about me, but I thought it was great. The basic plot of this book is that there's this guy Simon and he's gay, and somebody finds out that he's gay because he leaves his emails open, and then they start blackmailing him, saying that they're going to tell everybody at school unless Simon helps him hook up with one of his friends. Basically, that guy was a dick. So the entire book is basically Simon dealing with that situation and emailing his secret pen pal, who he doesn't know the identity of, and trying to figure out who he is because he knows it goes to his school, and it's just kind of a good high school book. Even though there are heavier bits, like the whole being threatened and blackmailed kind of situation, it's definitely a really feel-good book, and I finished this book and I was just like, yeah, it's so cute. I just kind of went into like a weird seal mode. It's just absolutely adorable, so if you just want a really mostly light-hearted YA book with LGBT characters, then this is the book for you. The next book on my list is The Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet by Kate Rorick and Rachel Kiley. This book is a continuation of the Lizzie Bennet diaries. There was the Secret Diaries of Lizzie Bennet book that came before this one, and that was basically a novelization of the Lizzie Bennet diaries, and this is the sequel to that book. But it takes place after the events of both the Lizzie Bennet diaries and the Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet. So this is an entirely new story. If you haven't seen the Lizzie Bennet diaries or read Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet, I'm about to drop some spoilers for that. So if you haven't got around to watching those and you don't want to know what happens, then just turn this video off now or mute me for a little while. This book follows Lydia as she is trying to finish up college and trying to figure out what she wants to do with the rest of her life, and kind of dealing with the whole aftermath of George Wickham being a piece of shit and trying to sell her sex tape on the internet without her consent. So obviously a lot of people in her town heard about all of that, and she's got this reputation now, and this book is her trying to deal with people's expectations and assumptions about her that have come about because of that whole incident. For a really cutesy kind of cover and title, you wouldn't expect it to be quite as heavy as it is, unless you knew about the Lizzie Bennet diaries, of course, but it really had a lot of things that struck a little bit too close to home, like fear of failure and not doing well in school and just fretting about your future. And there's also a lot of really great feminist stuff in here. They address slut-shaming and nice guys, and overall it's just a book where Lydia is trying to find herself again and trying to move on from the trauma. Overall, it's just really great, and if you've seen the Lizzie Bennet diaries, then you absolutely have to read this book because it's just great to see the Lydia character brought back and to see Cousin Mary makes a couple of appearances as well, and it's just overall great. I love it so much. We're kind of moving on to the fantasy section now, although this one is kind of a bridging book because it's still got a YA feel to it, and it is 1,000 Pieces of You by Claudia Gray. This is actually one of the very first books that I read last year. I think I started it in 2014 and I finished it in 2015, and I originally borrowed this from one of my friends, and then as soon as I finished reading it, I went out and bought it because look how freaking beautiful this cover is. Oof. I know I always said it was kind of YA, kind of fantasy, but it's also kind of sci-fi in the concept, although it doesn't feel like a sci-fi book, but it's also got some murder mystery and adventure and kind of time travel, but not really. The basic concept is that there's this girl, Marguerite, and her parents are physicists, and they've invented this little doodad that lets you jump into alternate dimensions, but her dad has been killed by one of their research assistants and has jumped into an alternate dimension, so she is chasing after him to try and catch him, and she's distraught, and it's basically just all of this is just her trying to process that and catch the guy that killed her dad, as well as jumping into some really cool settings. The alternate dimension jumping was absolutely one of my favorite things about this book. It was so much fun to see different versions of our world, and I know I mentioned it was kind of like time travel because in each time they jump into a new dimension, they're kind of in a different stage of development. So there's one that's kind of set in Russia, that's kind of more as if the Industrial Revolution never happened and the Tsars are still in power, and there's another one that's this really sort of like grungy, futuristic kind of London scene, and there was also another one that was like global warming had already happened and the sea levels had risen, so her parents, instead of being physicists in this one, were like oceanographers, and they were studying marine biology and that kind of thing because that was the most pressing kind of scientific development in their universe, and it was just really cool. And there was some good romance in this as well, and there was kind of love triangle-y a little bit, although not really. If you'll understand what I mean if you read this. Of all love triangles or love triangle-like things, it was definitely the most respectfully written for all of the characters, which was something that I really enjoyed, and it was just kind of kept me on the edge of my seat, and there were little plot twists every now and then that just kept me really excited and interested, and I just loved it, and also it looks so pretty on my bookshelf because it's just so beautiful. So the next book on my list is Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. This book was actually my favorite book that I read in the entire year. It was just absolutely beautiful. As you can tell by the gorgeous cover design, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, and this is the second book that I judged by its cover, but I basically bought this book pretty much because of the cover. So it's a magic realism book, and it follows the lives of 3 women. The main character is Ava Lavender, but it actually starts off following the life of her grandmother, and then it goes on to her mother, and then it goes on to her. So it does actually cover a really long space of time, like decades worth of time, but it didn't feel like any unnatural time jumps or anything, which is an issue that I've had with some books, where all of a sudden you're just thrust into the future and you're like, what happened? We were in a good place and then you just changed. Why did you do that, man? But it actually felt really natural, and I found the lives of all 3 women still really interesting, and it did kind of still talk about the grandmother and the mother a little bit more while it was talking about Ava Lavender's story as well, so it didn't abandon any of those characters at all. I don't really know what else to say about the plot of this book because it's just kind of one of those books that you have to read. I guess one of the main things is that Ava Lavender has wings, and it's just really cool. But again, this book has a lot of trigger warnings, which I'll put down in the description box in case you want to check those out, but I definitely recommend this because it was my absolute favorite book that I read this year. Next book on my list is The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. This book is actually part of the Kingkiller Chronicles. There's The Name of the Wind and Wise Man's Fear. Still waiting for the 3rd one to come out, which I think is supposed to be the last one. But this is kind of like a little novella that's book 2.5 or something like that. And it follows the character Ori, who is a character who's appeared in the first 2 books. This book definitely doesn't have any kind of sort of linear plot. The writing was just so beautiful that I was just sitting there crying, and I was like, why am I getting so emotional about soap? It also has some really gorgeous illustrations, like, these little pen illustrations are throughout the book, and although I think sometimes they were a little bit obstructive to the reading experience, especially when some of them, you know, take place over like part of a page that still has words in. I feel like it could have been blended into the text a little bit better, but overall they were just gorgeous, and I was just so glad to have bought this book. It was just so beautiful and weird. It's basically a character study of Ori. I just loved it. The next book we're going to talk about is actually a non-fiction book. It is You're Never Weird on the Internet, Almost, by Felicia Day. I love Felicia Day ever since I saw Buffy and Dr. Horrible sing-along blog and the Guild. I was just like, yes, Felicia, thanks for bringing Geek and Sundry to life. I love her worship, yes. I guess you'd call this a memoir or an autobiography. It basically feels like a really long chatty blog post, or that you're sitting down for a cup of tea with Felicia Day and she's just telling you all about her weird life and growing up as a homeschool kid, and then going to university when she was like a tiny little baby person, then leaving and then trying to become an actress, and then going to LA, and then just basically pushing herself way too hard but also achieving so many amazing things. There's stuff about online gaming and how she succeeded and made the Guild happen. It's just great. If you like Felicia Day, then you should definitely read this book. We're now in the graphic novel comic book section, so I'm going to first talk about Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. This graphic novel is so damn pretty. Oh my god. I love the illustration style and I love the typography, and the way that the page is just laid out is just beautiful, gorgeous, and creepy, and the cover is beautiful, and the paper quality is just really nice. It's got a cool take on some classic tales, and they're just kind of like creepy fairy tale things. Like the first one's based off Little Red Riding Hood, and it's just gorgeous and creepy, and I wouldn't actually recommend reading this at night because I creep myself out a little bit, but I'm easily creeped out. It's got things like this. Where's that really beautiful one that I love? Okay, like look at this. This is one of my favorite pages. Look how the typography just kind of curls around all the different frames. It's just focused on being really beautifully set out and just absolutely gorgeous. It's got really controlled color palette and I love it so much. It's just a great book to experience. Next on my list are the Hawkeye comics. These are the Marvel Now ones. They're the ones done by Fraction and Aja, and they're just, oh my god, they're so great. Last year one of my reading goals was to read more graphic novels and comics that weren't part of the Whedonverse, because previously all I'd really kept up with were the Buffy comics and the Firefly comics, anything that's to do with the Whedonverse. I even have a Dr. Horrible sing-along blog comic somewhere up there. I wanted to branch out and read something that wasn't from the Whedonverse, so I started with the Hawkeye comics. The Marvel comic book universe is like this crazy buck-ton mess of all of this history, and it's frankly quite intimidating to get into, so it took me a long time to try and get into it, but the Hawkeye comics were the perfect place to start because it basically just follows Clint Barton and the other Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, who's like his protege. I love Kate Bishop, she kicks ass, and the illustration style is absolutely gorgeous. Like, let's just take a look. Like, the color palette is really sort of controlled and it's really simple, and there was an entire issue in volume 2 that was from Hawkeye's dog's perspective. What more do you want in a comic book? 10 out of 10 do recommend. The next thing on my list is actually another Marvel comics. It's the Ms. Marvel comic books. The new Ms. Marvel with Kamala Khan, who is actually a Muslim American. Basically follows Kamala as she gets powers and decides that she wants to start saving the world and dealing with family and religion and society's expectations, and she's just a teenage girl and dealing with her parents and her brother. It's so good. Kamala is just the best character. I love her. She's definitely a voice of the generation. And also so important to see diversity in something as big as Marvel Comics. And as one of the first Marvel comics I've read, definitely off to a great start. Definitely my favorite part happens in volume 2. So basically Wolverine comes into it, and one of the cover arts is just her taking a selfie with Wolverine. Again, what more could you want from a comic book? I just started cracking up laughing as soon as I saw Wolverine show up, and she was just like, oh my god, I write fan fiction about you! Just great. Kamala is great, and everyone should read this. Okay, we're almost at the end. I just have one bonus thing to add, which is the Harry Potter audiobooks. Obviously, I've read the Harry Potter books 50 billion times before in my life, but I'd never listened to the audiobooks, so I got the Stephen Fry audiobooks, and I've been listening to them to go to sleep, and listening to them when I'm sad, and listening to them when I'm happy. Stephen Fry just does such a great job, apart from the fact that sometimes the way he pronounces people's names and spells irks me a little bit. Like, he's always says Draco Malfoy. It's just like, it's Draco Malfoy. Just like, calm yourself, Stephen. But overall, it was great, and I love the voices. His Mrs. Weasley voice is great. I was wondering what it was going to be like listening to the audiobooks, especially in some of the more emotional moments, but I found myself sobbing multiple times. Basically, as soon as we got up to the Order of the Phoenix, I was just a mess. I was like crying every other chapter in Deathly Hallows, so that was great. I was just like, ah yes, falling asleep, nice and gentle, listening to the soothing voice of Stephen Fry, and oh, someone's dead! I'm just gonna sob myself to sleep now. An amazing experience, but now I've finished them, So I don't know how I'm going to fall asleep now. Maybe I'll have to start them from the beginning again. And that's my whole list of all my favourite books that I read in 2015. If you've read any of those books, let me know what you thought about them in the comments below. And if you have any books that you want to recommend to me, then please do, because I love reading new books even though I have a book buying problem. So just give me your book recommendations and tell me what some of your favourite books were that you read last year. Also, I'll put a link to my Goodreads account down below, so if you want to add me on Goodreads, that would be cool. Although just like leave a message being like, yo, I'll watch your YouTube video, and then I'll accept you on Goodreads and we can share all our booky things as we read them. Yay! And I guess I'll see you in my next video. Bye!